You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. Welcome one, welcome all. We're so excited to have you with us here on our show. As always, if you are a returning member of the audience, we appreciate you joining each and every single day for these different episodes weekly. And if you're a new member of the audience, where have you been till now? Don't you know this is the place to be to get the best stories and the best experiences for your own journey? So for an introduction for the new viewers joining us, Changing Reality is a show that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, changing their own reality. And through the show, we have the opportunity to speak and learn from some of the most exciting entrepreneurs, change makers, business owners, thought leaders, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world who have done things a little bit differently and have watched their careers unfold in magnificent and exciting ways. And the goal is that by hearing these inspiring stories, hopefully we'll pick up little nuggets of wisdom that we can use to shorten our own learning curves and to hopefully not repeat any mistakes and learn from the experiences of the brilliant, successful people out there right now. And this is a show that I'm personally very passionate to do simply because I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do phenomenal things and make waves in the lives of those around them. And those are the stories that we should be talking about, the conversations that we should be having so that we can replicate that effect as much as possible. A quick introduction about myself. I am your host, Harsha, for this show. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania. And personally, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance, where I act as their co-founder and CEO. That started off in Malaysia, where I'm from, but today collaborates with not just our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but over 26 countries to provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning programs, and activities that help them discover what it is they love doing, learn about themselves and the world around them, and use that to create meaningful impact through starting their own careers while they're still in school. And to date, we've been fortunate to work with over 50,000 students across 1,000 communities and have incubated countless number of student-run projects, social enterprises, and more run by students as young as 8 to 25 years old. And the reason we've been able to do all of that has been stories. Has been kind individuals who've been willing to take time out of their busy schedules to share what worked for them, what were the lessons, and what were the things that they went through. So hopefully this show is that same platform for all of you so that you can, in a way, incubate at least your ideas through these words of wisdom. And if there are specific topics, industries, experiences, or even just, issues that you are going through that you want on this show to be addressed, please do reach out. You can let us know in the comments. You can also let us know personally on our social media, and we'll see how we can set up those conversations for you as well. So on to our speaker for today. He is someone who I think is truly inspirational in the sense that he has had a somewhat unconventional journey that is yet very exciting and very successful in and of itself. So starting off in the world of internet engineering and in the world of software, he progressively moved forward in his own journey to become a founder himself. And today actually is a venture capitalist, having acting as the CEO and having founded Awesome Ventures himself, which invests in B2B startups across ClimateTech, FinTech, MedTech, SpaceTech, enterprise software, and so much more. He has over 25 years of experience across these startups and exits, and provides hands-on mentorship to many of their portfolio companies today. Without further ado, let's welcome our amazing speaker onto our virtual stage.
Hi, good afternoon, Harsha.
Good afternoon. How are you doing? How has your week been? We were just talking about the exciting, never-ending, road that is, the life of a VC, right?
I guess the challenge for me is really that I'm covering the US and UK market while based in Singapore. So the weeks is always being hectic in the evening. And that actually is one of the most challenging things, having the conference call with the companies in the West Coast, especially given the time difference. That will be the most challenging things that we face. And of course, the usual things as a venture capitalist, I guess we are always concerned about the deal flows that we have and how our portfolio companies are performing. So in this climate, we are doing everything we can to support their growth as well.
I can imagine, they say it's both an interesting and somewhat terrifying time to be a startup in this current ecosystem. There's a lot of concerns about funding. There's at the same time a lot of innovation happening. So there's this kind of dichotomy. I often look at the entrepreneur's perspective. I'm sure it's much more stressful as the VC when you have to manage them. You have to find new startups. You have a lot of much more moving parts than us entrepreneurs who just focus on our own thing. So all the power to you and all the thanks on behalf of the entrepreneur ecosystem. But I'm so curious, you have had a very interesting journey itself. We spoke a little bit earlier about how you started in the world of tech in the beginning as well. And I think you mentioned previously in one of our conversations that you were even part of one of the first kind of big tech startups out of Singapore, which is where you're from. So we're neighbors. I'm from Malaysia, you're from Singapore, so we have a lot of synergy there. But where does your journey really start in a sense? At what point did you start thinking, okay, what, this is the grand plan for my life, this is what I'm going to do? I hope you didn't think that, since you were a student itself. But how were you like when you were, in the position that many of our viewers are in now, high school, early years, thinking about your career ahead? What did you want to do?
Right. The word grand plan seems to suggest that I will have mapped out my life every tiny little bit, but the truth is that isn't the case. I guess just like many youngsters during our younger days, right? I did spend a fair bit of my time, probably more time in the field than in the studies, and that made me took a detour. I did not successfully get into the college of choice upon my so-called we call it A levels in Singapore, and I have to did my tertiary education in the polytechnic. But at the same time, I was just fortunate enough to be exposed to computing back during the early 80s. So during that era, computers are not commonly available in every household. It's a very niche product. But I was just exposed to it, and that took me to the course that I was studying, computing. And when I was studying in computing in the of course, I hang around the computer labs and I came across the internet. So, and that was the gateway to new knowledge at that point in time. It changed my whole perspective. And the only plan I have back then, I wouldn't say it's a grand plan, is that I know that upon graduation, the jobs that I want to be in will be internet related. And that just leads me to be working for the very first internet startup in Singapore. And of course, along the way, I work in other startups in the Germany, in US. In fact, one that is really, how should I say, protecting the media companies against Napster back in the 2000s. So I guess that was really a detour compared to many of my peers who would have graduated and chose a route that worked with some of the bigger and well-known brand names in the IT world. For example, the IBM, the HP of the world. So that was really different because internet is very early days. Not many opportunities around, and definitely not as prestigious as compared to what we have nowadays.
I want to ask on that because, I feel like now, when people think startups, at least, some of the general perception is it's very synchronous to tech. It's very synchronous to, this cutting edge thing. You were one of the first few internet startups, in a sense, in Singapore, which is, a bit more of a different region that people often, I mean, Singapore is still fine. People still look at Singapore, but at that point in time, here in Southeast Asia, getting into the startup role, how different was it from today's world of startups that you see, and what were your early experiences that took you by surprise as you were part of this startup team?
I would say that the biggest change over the last 20 years or so will be the support system that entrepreneurs or even startup founders have today, not just in US, but even in Southeast Asia. In the past, a startup founder in just about in any country, there's there isn't as many venture capitalists or even angel investors around, especially in the technology space, because during the 90s, computer is not something that everyone may work with. Neither do we work with there isn't a mobile phone or mobile app at that point in time. So it is something very new. So there isn't enough investors around that understands what you're doing. So, but nowadays it has changed a lot. Uh, People who understand technology, people who study in the engineering field, have all proceed to grow their career in that field and become very successful over the years. And globally, governments and the various ecosystem like the venture capitalists have all come together to put in much greater support. Nowadays, if you're a venture, no, if you're a founder, easily you can gain access to one so-called training and support programs from some of the accelerator programs that we see in the market. Secondly, even from many different countries, there are always government support or government grants for startup founders as well. Depending on the kind of niche that you focus on, it is possible to tap into those for your growth as well. And of course, nowadays, apart from just raising money from venture capitalists, it's possible to raise money from angel investor as well. And there are platforms for that as well. So this part of the support has grown tremendously over the years. And I guess the other thing that really make things works nowadays is that it's so much easier to start a business, right? Technology has driven the cost down by a lot. No longer do we have to spend so much on, let's say, servers. In the past, we spent a lot of money on servers, but now you have cloud computing, and you can easily spin up a server for less than $10 a month, just to get going. So that really changes everything, I think. So I will foresee that moving forward, we can see that there are a lot more entrepreneurs. In fact, a lot of the younger generation nowadays, they are already entrepreneurs of some sort. They are content creators, they are influencers. They create things and they market things differently and reach out to their audience very differently from the so-called the older generation of my time.
No, very, very interesting. And when you were starting and you were in that entrepreneurial ecosystem, as you said, it's probably a bit different from working with the IBMs of the world and so on. How did you have trouble adapting to that fast-paced entrepreneur startup culture, or did it come naturally to you? Was that something that fit with your internal
Right.
rhythm?
I guess it fits naturally because I'm still young. It was my very first job, and I joined the whole ecosystem. Culturally, I'm a good fit to it.
You're like, this is
But
how all companies should be. Yeah.
but having said that, my girlfriend, which is my wife now, she freaked out during that time during the early years because she works in the financial industry, and of course in the financial industry, people are dressed prim and proper. The guys are expected to dress in shirt and pants with their ties on. But of course, I'm on the other side of the thing. We are in t-shirt and jeans, and during that time, it was so-called frowned upon. What are these guys really up to? Working late at night in a shop house. Those kind of questions that cross people's mind.
Oh, okay. Bit different in perception. Now everyone has
Yeah,
that same job.
definitely. But now, of course, now it's just so much more common, right? You have the Googles of the world, you have the Apple, and all of them might dress a little bit more casually.
No. Very cool. As you started, you were in, I think, the engineering part of it in the beginning, in a sense. Eventually, I think you went into a bit more of a consultancy role for a while, and then you went into a founder role as well. How did what made you feel that you wanted to transition from being on one side of the spectrum to now starting your own thing as well? Because again, that's not an easy thing to do. So I'm sure you had to have your internal processes and ways of thinking about it that made you want to start your own thing as well after a while.
I think it was interesting is that in terms of the mindset, a huge part of it is actually being influenced by the very first company that I worked with. So
Yes.
back then, like I said, it was the first internet startup in Singapore. And the kind of people that joins it just doesn't fit the regular mold of a corporate employee. We tend to look at things a little bit differently. we embrace technology and we embrace disruption. So moving over from engineering to say starting my own business is also just something that is second nature when you're in the ecosystem, because we are always so-called exposed to new disruption. We are always thinking about what does this new technology disrupt and why does it matter. So in my case, one of the companies that I founded was actually New Steps Technology. It was way before cloud computing is available, and New Steps focus on servicing or creating highly scalable systems, I would say, with limited resources. So because companies do not have a lot of budget to buy servers at that time, so how can we build system that is highly scalable without bursting the limits of the server? And that requires engineering efforts. So on one hand, it's consultancy. On the other hand, is entrepreneur from my point of view. Starting something to serve a very niche clientele base, big companies with budget that wants to scale their system.
And this is also like I think you were quite successful. You did this for many years in a sense, and you had a lot of interest in what you're doing. It's definitely a needed thing that even today I can see a lot of people probably still be very excited about it, at least the ones I know. But what was it different being in the founder's seat versus in the employee seat? What did you have to think about differently, and what were maybe some of the early challenges that you had?
So I believe the most important challenge for any engineer turned founder will be that you just have to start to learn to understand the actual needs from the perspective of your clients. Engineers are trained to provide solution, and they love talking about solution. Myself as well. It took me many years to get rid of that habit. Instead of just highlighting a solution upfront, solving the problems, we try to learn to hold back ourselves a little bit and listen more to what the client needs first before coming up with the respective solution. So I think holding that back is very important, and understanding whether that is a huge enough market for you to pursue will be the other thing that I think I faced during the early years, and I believe it still matters in nowadays with many of the startups. Are you pursuing a market that is sufficiently large enough for you to spend your next 3 to 5 years in it?
And one of the other things that I personally see when I work with founders and so on, there's also this marketing aspect of it whenever you're doing something, which I think can be a little bit tricky, especially if you come from a technical background, or if you're someone on the ground working on the project, working on the product in a sense. Sometimes we understand why it's the best solution, why it works, but to communicate that and to find the people who understand that communication can be a little hard. How did you kind of start with scaling your own kind of marketing plans and all of that, and start implementing like strategies to start growing the business in those early stages?
Right. To be honest, for my case, we target a very niche and specialized user and clientele. So I would say that if there's any changes to it, it will be that we adopted a more formal approach to our sales and marketing activities. It is nothing, how should I say, revolutionized in that case, but we are just adopting a very typical B2B sales approach. So we identify the stakeholders within the organization, and we map out who are the possible users who can help us with the deal. So they could be the users who have a specific requirements. We could have been the IT manager or the VP of the IT department who have a strategic direction that they are looking at. And we try to bridge all this together. And hopefully it aligns with what the client, in this case the company, wants to work towards in the mid to long run. So I would say that ours is really a B2B approach. We didn't do the mass market marketing kind of approach, but rather we are concerned about our value proposition to our clients. So that's one thing. Secondly, we are concerned about the leads that we generate. Who are we talking to? Are they the key decision makers? And that really helps. Coming from engineering background, we tend to not know what to do with sales, but I guess gaining insights and gaining access to why B2B sales matters or how it differs really change our perception on how all this can be done. And during my time, there isn't such a platform as like LinkedIn, where you can just easily connect with other targeted users, right? So a lot of it is still really through word of mouth. We try to serve our clientele well, and hopefully through referral, we can get other clientele on board as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot harder than, being able to, as you said today, use LinkedIn and go and text. So you have to really do a good job. You have to really focus on, building that network and so on. For a lot of entrepreneurs, we talk about the network element of it, the people element of it in a sense. How do you start creating kind of, the traction for what you do? And again, today you advise startups, so I'm sure you also have, the point of view of you doing it and helping others, do that. But how do we get plugged into these different ecosystems and make sure that we are really kind of leveraging on the network effects that are available? Definitely, there's more networks available now than when you were starting out. But how do you find the right places to meet, the right people to meet?
I think it comes from the positioning, just like any other companies out there. You decide on the positioning that you want to be in, right? So if you decided that I want to be in the startup ecosystem, then the next question is, how do you want to position yourself? Within the startup ecosystem, are you going to position yourself as, let's say, an expert in the growing EV field, right? Electric vehicle field. Then perhaps once you have decided that is the kind of direction that you want to go towards, you may want to participate in events or even volunteer yourself in helping out with events. That will be the easiest for any so-called someone who is new to this part of the world to get entrenched in. In fact, there's many VCs out there that I know that they started off by helping other firms to run events, and from there they grow their network, and of course they'll get to see a lot more pitch deals going around, and that grows their knowledge as well.
Okay, the co-organizing events is always very helpful. I know a
Correct.
couple
So
of
so so knowing where you want to head towards is important, right? So that you minimize the kind of distraction that you have in life.
so kind of like having a goal and being able
Yes.
to kind of make sure all of your different things are relevant to the goal, no matter how exciting opportunities can kind of pop up in between, but making sure it's centered and kind of goes back to that specific thing you want to achieve. Okay,
Correct.
so interesting. You also had a stint after that at a few different very interesting companies as well. I think one of the companies that you were part of was, I think, the Digital Arts Network. You were working on I think projects for Singapore Economic Development Board, SMU, some of the very big names in Singapore itself. How is it like now, in a slightly different role for you when you started having this more client facing role, this role of managing the different accounts and at the same time building things for these specific clients?
I guess when I was with Digital Arts Network or TBWA, then it was part of a TBWA group. Um, the key difference is that, of course, one, TBWA is a marketing agency, so the marketing aspect and focus on creativity comes up a lot stronger than, say, the engineering portion of it. So that was something that I have to adapt internally when we work with different
From
stakeholders in the
engineer
organization.
to founder to
All
now
right,
marketing.
right. So
Yeah.
it was something that I had to switch context with. But having said that, it was also a pivoting time for many agencies as well as marketing department in MNCs. Why? The reason is because that was the time where digital marketing starts to be adopted by a lot of all these organizations. It's a growing thing in organizations, and there is a need for this expertise as well. So running those projects is really just about delivering works and delivering good jobs to the clients. Less of, I would say, in terms of engineering challenges is really less challenging from what I used to do, but from the creativity portion, the various stakeholders and team members have been doing a good job, supporting all the initiative and campaigns. Um, for the clients. And that was really something that is exciting. And in fact, I would say that it's one of the training ground for myself coming from the engineering background to open my eyes and fully understand why or how companies do marketing differently from just being a B2B kind of approach. So that was different. When you have the budget, when you have campaigns, things are just different from, let's say, you're a startup founder with limited budget and you have to grow your business in a different way.
No, definitely. Like I think that's a very good point, and it's a different lens. Like as you mentioned, when you have a startup, it's people, very casually trying things out, experimenting. When it comes to companies, it's a bit more
Structure,
protocol and a
yeah,
lot of other things come into the mix. How do you know when, like, you made a good kind of career pivot at that point in time to an industry that was really booming, and there was, like, as you said, it was something that people were beginning to adopt and so on. How do you go about, like, following these trends? Because, like, even now we know that there's going to be a slightly different adoption for certain things in the industry by MNCs, by startups, by everyone, but nobody can exactly call when it's going to happen unless you look back in hindsight. So how did
right.
you know, like, in your career, when it was time to pivot and when the next opportunity was presenting itself?
It was. I think it still goes back to my very first job, and because I've stayed in the startup ecosystem for so long, and you know, I spend most of my time reading everything about new technologies and new startups from the very first day I joined the workforce. So it was something that is ingrained to me. It never come across as something that I have to work on because I'm always being exposed to new technologies. But one thing that is clear to me during my early years was that you can actually systematically predict whether something is going to grow bigger. If it's really during the infancy, it's difficult. But once it gain a little bit of traction, you can systematically try to have a hypothesis why it's going to be bigger. For example, a very simple example will be during my early years back in the 90s. The hypothesis was more and more companies are using computers and they are building business application. So that means more and more data will be needed to store on the server. So
Mm.
existing technologies cannot store so much data, so there will be a need for new technologies. So likewise, now if you to look at the current lens that we have, we talk about climate change. So climate change can have a few drivers, right? Of which one of the biggest key drivers for adoption of climate change will be all the countries in the world, or rather many countries in the world have signed a Paris agreement where they want to go net zero and to maintain the kind of temperature at a certain level, right? So that itself is a key driver, and there will be penalties for it down the road.
Hmm.
So that itself will ensure that the market is growing. New technologies is needed because we cannot use the existing approach to solve a climate change issue.
Because if we had the technology to solve climate change, I think we'd have done it by now. So
Right.
I agree on that. And funny you bring up climate change. One of the things that I do is I run this inter Ivy entrepreneurship network. So hundreds of the top entrepreneurs, in a single space, essentially to kind of share opportunities to kind of be able to put together the best entrepreneurial solutions. And one of the things is every semester we kind of survey and understand what are the things that are most interesting to this group of entrepreneurs. What are they building? What are they working on? And this year, the two things that came out that are the themes for our October event in NYC is climate and AI. And this is very like reflective, I think, of the current buzz and ecosystem and everything that's happening right now, because we see a lot of investments in the climate and AI space. We see a lot of interest. One of it literally is because the world is burning, and another one because there's a lot of innovation in the space where every day you hear news and things like that. The question I have is, you seem to have both a very specific lens of, okay, this is what is exciting, this is what is happening now, let's focus on this. But at the same time, when I see some of the things you also invest in things like SpaceTech. You also invest in things that are a bit more, less traditional and less in the mainstream. How do you come to those kind of decisions? Because I doubt you have like a bunch of entrepreneurs that you are surveying every semester. So what do you like?
Right.
You can like there is a moment where you're tapped into the ecosystem and you're tapped into the feed of information, but there's also an element of kind of looking forward and critical thinking, right? So how do you kind of look at the things that are not being emphasized right now?
When I first looked into the space industry, it was through the lens of climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that I just jumped straight into and say, "Oh, I'm going to invest in
Cool.
space." I was looking at climate change, and it crossed my mind that like you say, there's many new technologies that companies are embracing or innovating with. One of it is artificial intelligence. So, and that brought me to the idea: what can we do with AI in space? And ultimately, with some research, it brings me to the big bucket space. Of course, if we have satellites in space, then of course with AI and imaging, we can deal with more climate change, right? Like a forest burning, the river drying up. All this can be done because we have better imaging systems. Now we have AI to detect the changing river flow, for example. So that's one part. Some of the things that I invest in space is because it can help with climate change. Then the second one that I invest, it was actually a very interesting thing. I was also looking at the space industry, and I start looking at definitely the industry is growing, and I came across a figure that says that the orbit satellites, low Earth orbit satellites, is going to grow from 3,000 to 30,000 easily over the next few years. That's just a very conservative estimate. So it can potentially even grow to 100,000 over the next few years.
Oh
Now,
wow.
the more satellites we have in the space, it's just like the more trash we have in the seawater. Ultimately, you will have space debris lying around in space. Some of it will drop below a certain orbit and you came crashing on Earth. If not, they will be just drifting in space. Secondly, we also start thinking about satellites are expensive. No matter how much cheaper it is now compared to let's say 20 years back, satellite is still expensive and is an asset to the owners. So I was thinking along the line, if there are more satellites growing and orbiting around the Earth, definitely this industry will be booming with other supporting industry. For example, a satellite service company, or even can we harvest energy in space? And that was how it forms my part of my thesis to investing in space industry.
So it's like you connect the dots between, okay, what is happening right now, what is a future opportunity, and how are these things connected? So you kind of like piece it all together when you're coming up with your investment strategy.
Yes.
Pretty
So
much.
for those who are in the consulting space, then I guess the key phrase will be what are the key drivers for it, right? If you answer
Mhm.
this question, what are the key drivers? This is the current situation, this is the problem, and what are the key drivers? If you can answer these three questions, I think you are already 60% ahead of many other people in terms of forming your own thesis.
We skipped ahead on this, but I also wanted to circle back on this. What in the first place made you want to start your own VC firm? I mean, it's a tall process in a sense. It's not like tomorrow you decide, oh, okay, I can like you can always invest as an individual, but to start your own firm, to go in there to work out all these theses, it
Hmm.
requires a lot of work and
A
focus.
couple of things shape my views on this. The first is that I have always been exposed to being an angel investor. So when I was much younger, obviously I do not have much money, and I have to write on my boss's investment. Through their because they are more well off. I'm able to write on some of their investment. That's one. So secondly, over the many years, when I started working, it was the Asian financial crisis, and I have came across many crises throughout my career. We have the dot-com bust, we have the 9/11 issue, we have the SARS, and of course the global financial crisis, so on and so forth, many crises. But I was just fortunate enough to invest during every crisis or to get out before the crisis hits. So, what prompts me to setting up my own venture capital firm is that one, I always know that I want to start my own fund. That's one. That's something at the back of my head. I just don't know when, right? But 3 years back, when the pandemic COVID-19 hits, I felt that that was the right time to consolidate everything that I have and start a firm venture fund to start investing in the startups that I love, And of course, given that I have a preference for startups in the US and UK, I decided that that will be the kind of market that I will start with rather than investing in Southeast Asia. You're on mute, I believe.
Oh my gosh, okay. Embarrassing, but it's okay. But I was just saying that that's a very nice way of, fleshing out your journey as an investor and also, the way you think about investing. I'm very curious about, your global mindset. I know, in some of your roles, you worked with companies that, had clients and were based out of China. You invested in the UK and in the US. A lot of entrepreneurs that I know in Southeast Asia sometimes have a tendency to be a bit boxed up in the region in a sense. So they're either, if they're like in Malaysia, they're like, I must be the best in Malaysia. But a lot of them, they don't often look beyond the different opportunities. I mean, there are those who do, and like kudos, love them. But it is a bit of a stretch to start thinking globally in a sense and to find contacts globally, to start looking at strategies globally, because it's not something that you can just learn from reading. Like, yes, you like there's a lot you can learn, but there's a lot of it that also comes from meeting people. There's a lot of it that comes from understanding the market in a sense. How did you start building your global mindset, and start expanding your kind of circle internationally?
I guess I'm a typical Singaporean, and being raised, and growing up in Singapore, to a certain extent, we have been so-called trained with the mindset to be a global citizen in a sense, because the market for Singapore is just that tiny. We have to be at least a regional player, if not a global player. So that changes, or rather, that shapes my mindset. I would say I won't say that changes my mindset. That shapes my mindset. Now, for founders, I don't think that they have to think about global domination from day one. They can think about regional domination, and that's fine if the market is big enough, because there's enough money for everyone. So the more important is to think about, if you are starting, let's say, a company in Malaysia, then the next question is, once you scale beyond your home country, which region are you entering, and what kind of activities are you going to do? Is it going to be completely different? What kind of resources and support do you need moving forward? So having said that, that means that you have to think about your business. Is this something that can be repeated and duplicated in the various region that you go into? For example, I spoke to an entrepreneur in Malaysia once. He was in the taxation filing kind of business. So, and taxation, given that it's such a country influence kind of business, that means that for
Every country has their own
he
laws.
has to change some of the best practices along the way. So it was not something that I'm comfortable with, even though that I know that it's possible to earn money from it. Everybody wants to do taxation, but it was not something that I prefer to be involved in. So that is some of the things that we have at the back of our mind as well. Whether you want to grow globally, or even within Malaysia, if it becomes a dominant player, then maybe there's sufficient money within the home country, right? So it's not something that you have to think about, but it's something that you have to consider from the investor point of view. If you're asking for investment, what kind of questions will they be asking for? So different investors have different appetites and different outlook in terms of investment. So in my case, I prefer companies that can grow at least regionally, right? In the case of US, it's East Coast to West Coast, and from there you go on to Europe. So that's the
It's a
easy way.
continent itself, yeah. One of the questions that as we wind down, I want to ask is, I really love your journey because, as you said, you went from engineer to founder to, looking at the marketing side to today being the investor yourself, and so many roles in between that. How do you think those different experiences have helped you today in your current role of investing in companies? How does it let you think differently, or maybe see things from a different angle as you are having these conversations and making a decision?
I guess you have already nailed the keywords. Having experience in multiple roles allows me to see things in different angles. That's the good thing, right? I guess. But at the same time, I don't claim to be the expert, because then there will be others who will have spent a huge part of their career working on a very niche market and they become very good in it. So I will never be as good as those people are in those fields. So in this case, it's important to know my limitations and seek out partners to work with. So for example, maybe in a complicated deals, I may need a seasoned CFO to help me navigate the process because maybe it involves M&A, right? There's a lot of figures that we have to dig through, and definitely I won't be the best at it. So I guess having experience in multiple roles allows me to see things in different angles. So I guess that's the good thing about it. I hope I did not lose you for a moment, because I
Yeah,
think
I think you cut off towards the end.
right. Do you need me to repeat anything?
If you can just kind of end the last sentence, I think, or just kind of rephrase that, that'd be great.
So what's the question? Key question again? I lost part of it as
Different
well.
points of views, being an expert
Different
in
points
your
of view. Wonderful.
yeah.
Yes. So I guess you knew it in the sense that, given different roles that I've been exposed to, I also have different views of it, because that's a training ground. But at the same time, I also know that I won't be as good as some of the people who specialize in a certain field. So when it comes to doing, let's say, due diligence on an M&A deal where there's a lot more numbers to look at, maybe I have to partner and rely on a seasoned CFO. Or it could be in a market like the development world of the battery markets, a lot of specialized
Mm.
chemicals. I will also need some specialists in that field. So knowing your shortfall and knowing when to partner is also important in this sense, I would say. We don't have to do everything, in fact. Just like any other entrepreneur, don't be an engineer to try to solve everything yourself. Partner with people, leverage on others to do the job as well.
Oh wow, that's a that's a nice end phrase in a sense. Don't solve everything by yourself. Like resist the engineer instinct to solve everything by yourself. Okay. I like how you recap that. Final question, as we wind down for today. A lot of people, they want to get into, this world of finance, this world of tech, this startup world in a sense. I was very lucky. I kind of fell into it back at home in a sense, like really, really, and I'm very privileged in that sense. And then recently, I've been very lucky to go to the US and see this very, very aggressively vibrant ecosystem that again I've accidentally fallen into in a sense. But I know that not everyone is, as privileged as I can be at times in a way. So for those who are, watching this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I have a career like yours in a sense? It's at the forefront of the latest changes that's happening. That is, always at the exciting, pivots to be in China as a technology and the startup scene unfolds. What is your advice to them of where they can get started and how they can start, circling back to what we said earlier, maybe not having the grand plan, but having an initial
Right.
plan or getting their mindset ready to, make the pivots when the
So
opportunity calls.
very good question. I guess the first thing to remember is that if you are thinking about joining this industry, let's say you want to be a VC down the road to make money, I would say don't, right? Don't be a VC to make money. Because why? Uh, there are a lot more startups that fail than makes money. So you have to be prepared for all these failures in life. So that's one. And of course, being a VC, that means you're also an investment or financial professional. If you're able to be in the investment field, you also have the opportunity to consider things like being in the private equity field as well. They have a much larger asset under management, and their deals are much more profitable. So I would say that if you want to consider to be in this startup ecosystem, you have to find out a niche or an area that gets you excited. Right? It could be, if you dial back, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, it could be e-commerce, could be something that excites you and you believe in that. Or even if you go back earlier, it could be the arrival of the iPhone and what it means for mobile application. That was a changing, pivoting time, and you believe in it. And of course, moving forwards, I think a lot of the younger generation, I see that they have this belief about what blockchains can bring about. And I see these people are trying to find out their own niche and career path within the whole ecosystem. They may or may not become a venture capitalist, but I can sense that they are finding their ways to build something within this sector itself. So I would say you have to find something that you like first before you think about whether you can make money out of it. It's a tough journey being in the startup ecosystem.
I think you answered it very well. If you're thinking of getting in just to make money, don't. That's enough.
Right.
But if you find that niche, if you find that thing, then it makes sense. All right.
So in my case, it was really the passion for internet, and that just got me into the startup world. So and I just never leave the world. That's all.
Okay. Very, very nicely said. Thank you so much for being on our show. I think you have, as I said, a very exciting journey, something that all of us can hope to have and hope to be as wise and good at gauging things as you have been. So appreciate you coming on the show. And I hope you had as much fun talking to us as we did, listening to your stories as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. And with that, our session for today comes to an end. Thank you to our audience. This has been Changing Reality. As always, see you again next week. And thank you for tuning in.
Have a good one.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.